This
Okay, we're
conference will now be recorded.
perfect. Perfect.
There we
Hey,
go.
everybody. Hey, everybody. This is Tammy, Technical Difficulties Delu, here with you with another edition of the Safe Space Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about something that is probably scary to a lot of people, but it's something we all need to think about, and nobody likes to do so. And it's about planning for the time when, number one, you're no longer going to be working. You're no longer going to have you're not going to be able to recover from mistakes that you made as easily as you did when you were younger. And one of the mistakes people make is not planning for their health and their lack of health. And we hear the horror stories about long-term care and people, eating tuna because or cat food because they can't afford to have long-term care and eat at the same time. And those stories, unfortunately, are true. So today's guest, I ran across him on LinkedIn. I thought he had some very wise, very intelligent posts, sort of a witness and a warning to people that are not thinking too seriously about what they're going to do when they need or if they need long-term care. His name is Jim Koewler. He's an attorney specializing in senior issues, and I'm sure he does a lot of things probably with trusts and planning, and he can tell you some of the things that people are doing that they shouldn't be doing when it comes to this. Welcome to Safe Space Podcast, Jim.
Thank you.
How's it
Well, glad to be
how's
here.
it how's it going today? So I was telling people that you are interesting for an attorney. You're rather direct and not sugarcoating anything today. I don't want you to sugarcoat this situation because it's very, very serious for people. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this particular area of law.
Okay. Well, I became a lawyer in 1987. Went to a big law firm that worked for business and did environmental law. I've done Superfund sites and clean air and clean water and hazardous waste and even scrap tires. Um, and I kind of got tired of that. Um, I liked helping my clients be better citizens of the world, and then the political winds changed, and they didn't feel pressure to be better citizens of the world. They felt pressure to try to kick the can down the road. And while I'm not the most avid tree hugger in the world, I am kind of a tree hugger. Um, and about that same time, my wife's grandfather, who had some sort of dementia, I don't think we ever had it particularly diagnosed, but because it's the most prevalent, we can assume it was Alzheimer's for sake of argument. But he also had some hip thing going on. We never did figure out why. He really lost all strength in his hips and quite suddenly. And maybe it was because of the dementia, maybe not. I don't know. And because of his dementia, that he forgot that that walker right there by his chair was his. And when he tried to get up, excuse me, he collapsed to the ground, broke his leg, and his wife could no longer take care of him at home because he couldn't help her get himself into the shower or into the bathtub or anything. And a lawyer who does elder law in Boardman, Ohio, they lived in Pullen, Ohio. They're both suburbs of Youngstown. Um, Helped them. And the relief that I saw her experience when she realized she was not going to be broke, and the relief that I saw her daughter, my mother-in-law, and her son-in-law, my father-in-law, experience, realizing that Nan was not going to be broke, I realized I wanted to help families do that. And right about that same time, the federal government was changing the law on how one could get long-term care Medicaid. They were changing it drastically. This was 2006 and 2007. And there were lots of seminars, and I jumped into one and have been doing it ever since.
This is just to be clear to everybody, this is not something that's uncommon, what you experienced, correct? I mean, this happens a lot to people.
Oh, having something like this happen in the family, oh, happens frequently. The
Yes.
vast majority of my clients have not planned ahead, and even those that have can use help at the time implementing the plan. But in addition to that, one of the things that I've started doing recently, I've been looking for 5 years until I finally found the person I wanted. I work with a care coordinator. Actually, I work with three. Once I found my first one, I figured out what I was looking for and found two more. I have nurses that check on my clients' care and make sure they're getting the care and support services they're supposed to get, whether they're in long-term care, approaching long-term care because of some chronic illness, or they have special needs. And we address all of those. We try to handle both the legal issues and the care and support services to make sure that our clients can have the best life they can under the circumstances despite their health challenges.
And I was thinking, that was what stood out about you to me when I was looking at your profile on LinkedIn, was that it's different. You actually put some humanity into the law. It's not just the nuts and bolts and the math behind it, but you're also taking care of people, literally.
Well, I'm trying to do for my clients what I would want someone to do for my grandmother.
Exactly. And I think, again, when we were talking earlier, you were talking about how people have a lot of misconceptions about this whole subject. It's sort of a mystery. I know that when my in-laws went through it, my father-in-law got dementia and my mother-in-law had some other health issues. We were all shocked at, number one, how much it costs for these
Oh,
things.
yeah, it's terrible scary.
It's mind-blowing. It's really,
And
even
you're in
even
California. I could shudder to think what it costs in California compared to
well,
here
it's
in Ohio.
probably at least $2,000 or $3,000 a month more than it is in other states, at least. I know that it was close to $10,000 for each one of them to
Yeah.
be in a long-term care facility. Now, the mistake a lot of people make, even though the government has come out again and again and again with these things saying, Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. And even though I work in the insurance industry, and we all know that, right? Why are so many people still refusing to grasp that fact that they think Medicare is going to take care of it?
Um, a couple of reasons, I think. One, back when Obamacare was being discussed, it actually included long-term care coverage. Now, that was the first thing cut out in order not to completely blow up the federal government. But, well, you could say it was not to blow up the federal budget, but I think it was necessary to even get it passed. That had to be jettisoned, unfortunately, and it probably would have been parked in the Medicare area. Second is because we repeatedly have political conversations on Medicare for all, and at the same time have conversations on how to take care of our aging population, and the two start to get melded together in people's minds, and they get melded together in discussions as well. So that's not surprising. And I think the third reason, and perhaps the most obvious, is that the federal Medicaid program has a long-term care program inside it. And Medicaid and Medicare are so close as words that it's easy to get them mixed up. And perhaps the fourth reason is people who are worried about long-term care in the future don't worry about it too much because it just makes them miserable. And while I agree with you, it'd be great if people planned ahead for their long-term care. I can understand why they don't. They just the same way we don't want to talk about our own death. It just the world is depressing enough. We don't want to make it any worse.
Exactly, but being, it's more depressing when you realize you haven't done any planning, I think, but that's just me. I'm looking at it from a insurance perspective. I want you to know. I mean, that's like I'm thinking, okay, here's some issues I see on the insurance side why people don't want to think about it because their options, they don't understand all their options, number one. Number two, they think that maybe they've gone to an insurance agent and he or she has told them, look, there is insurance for this, but then they look at the policy and they say, oh my God, it's so expensive. It's
Yeah,
crazy. There are many fewer carriers than there were a few years ago. So your options are, you don't have as much choice. It's a use it or lose it type of insurance. So they're looking at it like auto insurance, like, okay, if I never have a wreck, I've just wasted all that money I've put into my premiums. So they
right.
don't know there's alternatives to this. And also, like you said, many people believe they're going to be able to get into the Medicaid program. Now, they've made changes, as you pointed out, that were really, really drastic back in early 2000s, mid 2000s.
In '06 and '07.
So,
It was the Deficit Reduction Act of 2006, but it didn't pass until February of 2007. It's
so what
buried
were
inside
those?
the budget.
What were those? Those were pretty draconian in many ways. What now? If you're a person getting to that age and you think you're going to be in Medicaid, what are you looking at as far as
Okay. So
obstacles?
the 2007 changes were from what the big changes to what we call the look back period. Uh, it's how far the Medicaid program looks back to see if someone gave money away to make themselves artificially poor. And for those who are only listening, I'm making air quotes on artificially poor. Um, and in order to become eligible for Medicaid to pay for long-term care. And they used to look back 3 years. If they used a trust, they looked back 5 years. Well, in 2007, they made everything a 5-year look back, or 60 months looking back. In addition, you cannot get a Medicaid start if you have a penalty, if you gave stuff away. Um, it used to be that the penalty started the month after you gave it away. So if you gave away enough money to say cover 10 months worth of care, that ended up down the road, it was 10 months worth of money you gave away, then the penalty was 10 months, but it started the month after you gave it away. The VA does that now, by the way. They didn't used to have any look back period and to have any penalty. But Medicaid in 2007, actually Congress in 2007, said the penalty cannot start until you're otherwise qualified to get Medicaid coverage. You have to be poor enough to get Medicaid coverage. So if you gave something away, how are you going to pay for coverage during the penalty period, what Medicaid calls it, or the restricted Medicaid coverage period, the professionals call it, um, when you don't have money to pay? So there's a whole cottage industry growing up around that for people who want to qualify for care sooner rather than later and still want to protect something. But that was a huge change in delaying the start of the penalty until someone was broke enough and ill enough to need long-term care and in a long-term care setting. Okay. So it really got tricky, and um, it made more business for lawyers like me and a whole bunch of lawyers at the time. I'm told, I wasn't there at the time. Remember, I was just starting. I'm told that about a third of my would-be competitors dropped out at that point because they said, I'm not doing anything that complicated. I'm gone. And other than hearing the stories, I don't know what it was like before.
So
So
it's you just answered my next question kind of is like, why would a person go to an attorney such as yourself that specializes this versus, say, for example, their nephew who sells long-term care insurance or does senior planning? Why would you go to? Because you just answered that because it is pretty tricky, isn't it, to get it right?
yes, it is. But if people want to plan ahead, I am a big fan of long-term care insurance. I don't care if they get it as standalone insurance, they may balk at the cost, but they can get long-term care insurance. They can get life insurance as a long-term care rider, which is basically the same thing. And then you don't, making air quotes, waste it, because the only way you're going to waste that policy is by not dying. And if you complain to me about not dying, I know people, we can fix that problem. Um, and then the third way is you can insure it by buying certain annuities. Now, these are mostly pay up front lots of money. So this is somebody that really has a bunch of money they want to set aside all at once. You can buy an annuity with a long-term care rider. You can also buy it in pieces, I think, but it's still pretty expensive. Um, and so those are the three ways to insure. There's also a way to pre-plan by giving money away before you need care, and you cross your finger that it's more than 5 years before you need care. Or the default is not doing anything. And people can choose to not do anything because they're going to die before they need long-term care, or they're going to kill themselves if they have dementia, or whatever they think they're going to do. Or since they never think about it, since most people never think about it, that becomes the default situation, that they simply haven't planned ahead. And if it helps them emotionally get through many years, I, like I said, I can't say I blame them. If they're not emotionally ready to handle that discussion and handle making those choices, um, I guess it's okay because it's their life in the meantime. But when the poo hits the fan later, it's kind of too late to say, "Oh, I should have done it different."
Well, exactly. But the other thing is, if you're the kind of person that doesn't want this to fall on the shoulders of your spouse or your children, come on. I mean, the only way you can prevent that is to sit down
Yes.
when you're still healthy and plan. Okay,
Yeah,
What
that's right.
if, whether
Now,
we have a,
so
especially if you have a history.
the biggest market for long-term care insurance is people who have been through the long-term care journey with a loved one. They,
Absolutely,
they've
absolutely.
seen it
Nothing.
and go, "Oh my God, I don't know what to happen to my family," and so they look at getting insurance. That's when my mother got insurance, when it
It's the
happened
same
for her
thing. Yeah.
grandmother.
In my family, everybody looked at one another and went, "Uh-oh,
Yeah,
this was bad. We
yeah,
don't want this. We don't want this to decimate although the wealth that we have. We want it to go for good things, not for this."
yeah.
So, you hear about people doing you talk about the look back and the other things. People, it's still possible to get Medicaid for long-term care, but there are two alternatives that you mentioned that are really good in some cases, which is the living benefits, life insurance with living
Mhm.
benefits, and there are annuities. They're actually popping up more and more now. But here's what I've noticed too. There's about 13 states now that I've counted that are getting ready to make long-term care required. As a matter of fact, I just read a story about it's already happened in the state of Washington. You may be aware of
Yes,
that.
yep.
It was kind of a total disaster
Well, it has
because
been kicked down the road a couple of times, so it's
yeah,
the discussion was a disaster. The implementation hasn't even happened yet, and there's of course at least one lawsuit.
at least. And the same thing's happening here in California because, that's what we do. So what's happening there is that they're going to try, in the state of Washington, did a 0.58% penalty. It was actually a payroll tax for people that could
Yeah,
not
it's a
prove
payroll
that
tax.
yeah, it's a payroll tax. They're adding it onto people's checks. And they really didn't give anybody a chance to go shopping for any alternatives. They just did it so fast. And so there's a lot of issues with that. But I do believe that that states, especially states that are, for lack of a better word, sanctuary states, where they're having problems with their budgets, you're going to see this passed. So my issue is that, are they going to accept alternatives to standalone long-term care, because they have to be similar to Obamacare, they have to be qualified
Hmm.
plans. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yes,
because a lot of people have been saying to me, "Gosh, I can't afford long-term care, and I don't want to pay this tax because I'm in such a bracket that I'll end up paying more tax than I'll ever get in benefits." Right? So you only get like 36,500 lifetime. That's
right.
it. That's what,
Yeah,
3 months in a care facility.
yeah.
So a lot of people don't want to pay this, and I'm wondering, do you get any vibe on how the policies, your alternatives, your long-term care annuities and those kind of things, are they going to be acceptable, do you think? Because this is coming
Um,
whether you want it or not. I just see it.
yeah. I think they're going to have to be acceptable because people have paid into them, and they've probably paid more than 58 cents per $100 of income to buy these things, but they're also probably more valuable than the 36,500 or whatever Washington is planning to do. I'm going to use Washington as the model because it's the one that's farthest along, as far as I can tell. Um, but it's yeah, if people choose a standalone policy, I think they're going to the state governments are going to have to accept it. But all the states are watching what happens in Washington as the model to see if there's a way to cut this item in their budgets, because it's huge in the budget. And with baby
Huge.
boomers turning 67 right now, the oldest baby boomers um, are turning 77, and it, everybody's watching this because that's going to be an enormous bubble of people who need care. And as we've seen already, there's not enough people to take care of them, and that's not going to get any better over time.
And it's crazy because I just read somewhere that the demographers are saying that by the year 2030, 2035, that you're going to actually have, for the first time ever in America, more people over 65 than under 18, which
Hmm.
you can see how that's going to not there. It's so funny as they're trying to find all the cures to, inflation and this, that, and the other, and healthcare. But the thing that they cannot solve, they have no way of doing it, is demography. You
Right.
can't suddenly wave your wand or fiat in a bunch of people that are over a certain age, that are working, that are paying into the system, and it's just become just really an issue, I think. I'm just like, I'm looking ahead to my own time when I will need this. And I'm like, there's not
Yeah.
even enough people to take care of me, even if I had money. There's a shortage of long-term care workers, of memory care workers.
And a
Have you-
shortage of just general healthcare workers. Acute care is suffering a shortage as well.
Wow.
And most long-term care stays are preceded by acute care. So if the acute care is not what it's up to, then someone's coming into long-term care with less introductory care, we'll call it. So they're coming in weaker than they otherwise would have been.
And they may have to, so that may increase the stays, right? So
Yes,
so it should have been maybe a month stay in long-term care, and it goes into 6 months or 8 months,
yes,
which just
easily.
it's
Or
like a
with memory care, it's going to be forever because unless we can find a cure to Alzheimer's or the other dementias, that's not going to reverse itself.
it's really it is depressing. No wonder
It
people don't
is.
want to talk about it, Jim. So
Exactly. Which is why
so
I don't blame them if they don't want to.
when somebody comes to you, it's usually already to the point where they're having their come to Jesus moment. They're like, I have to have help. But before that gets to that stage, what would you recommend people do right now? Like, say you're 40, 45, and you're healthy right now, you're working, you've been doing the right things, putting things in 401ks, you've been doing all that stuff. How do you add this component in? What would you do at this point in time?
Well, even more than money, I think positioning oneself legally is the least expensive step that people can take. Write good powers of attorney, get a healthcare power of attorney, figure out who is likely to be your agent, your spouse first, and then after that, look at your children and see which child is most likely to take you in when you need care. You may want to revisit that question when you retire because that's probably the last time you're going to be looking at your paperwork. So general power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, a living will if you want one. As we are seeing more of them, a psychological power of attorney or psychiatric power of attorney. Um, some states have I think it's called the five wishes, but the more amorphous the answers are, the harder they are to carry out. I am a big fan. Actually, a friend of mine and I have written together an arbitration opt-out advance directive. Hey, nursing home, I know you're going to put an arbitration clause in my contract. Under federal rules, I can say I don't want it. But at the time I move in, I'm going to be under the gun. I'm going to sign any damn thing you put in front of me because I just need the care and I'm sick and I don't feel well. So this is a way to say right now at 40 or 55 or whatever time when you're healthy, I don't want that. And you can find that on my website under protectingseniors.com under the toolbox tab.
Yeah, we're
Another thing, good
definitely
thing,
going to put that in there. I'll let you know. I'll put all your contact information because it's
yeah,
such good.
okay. And then another good thing to have is a HIPAA release that lists all your likely advocates, okay? Not just the one on your healthcare power of attorney, but your likely advocates, any family member or friend that's likely to want to have a say in making sure you get good care ought to be on this HIPAA release so that the care provider can't say, oh, well, we can't talk about that with this person. We don't have a HIPAA release. It's private, which it is, but that's why you have a HIPAA release. You list everybody on it, and that's okay. Now, you got to be comfortable listing those people, but please, this is somebody who's going to look out for you when you can't look out for yourself. So, good legal documents sitting, waiting till the time that you actually need them is the least expensive way to position yourself to be prepared for long term care. And then after that, if you want to talk about how you're going to fund it, now look at insurance, look at giving things away either into a trust or to a person. A trust is more protective over the long term than giving to a person, or simply making the decision, I'm going to take my chances financially. But still, it's only a few $100s or maybe a couple thousand, depending on the attorney you go to get good powers of attorney. In addition, on my website, in the toolbox tab, you find an article I wrote for the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association's Bar Journal, they call it, on how I think, from the long-term care perspective, people ought to be writing their powers of attorney and other associated documents.
And I think you hit on some really good things there. It's not just about getting older. I mean, I think honestly, what you just said, everybody should have, regardless of their age,
Yeah.
because you just never know. I mean, I've had friends who had unfortunate accidents. I had one of my friends had a heart attack at 28 years old and was incapacitated at 28. with a
Yeah.
young family. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew who was in charge of what. It was really
Yeah.
chaotic. So I think, you can't assume that
No.
you're gonna,
When
you're
my
gonna.
kids went away to college, I made them I made them write healthcare powers of attorney. Mom was one agent, dad was another agent, and then somebody who was going to be near them, a roommate, because both of them went away to college, only a couple hours, but still, in a healthcare emergency, I wanted somebody close. So they both had healthcare powers of attorney. Now they're living in new cities. I need to continue to nag them to do something appropriate for the state where they live now. One's in Manhattan, one's in Denver. But I made darn sure they had those healthcare powers of attorney, and uh, they're both still effective. I just would prefer they get something appropriate for the current states.
Well, absolutely. And I was talking to my daughter about that. She's 21. And I just realized one day that I can't make any of her decisions for her. And you just don't want to think about that. But at the same time, I realized that I could not, for example, she says, Mom, if I'm brain dead, you need to disconnect. And I said, you have to put it in writing now because you're not 15 anymore. And so anybody that's listening to that is so critical. I hear these horror stories every day because
Yeah.
I work with insurance agents and advisors, and nobody thinks they're going to have a heart attack. Nobody thinks they're going to get in some sort of accident and not be able to think for themselves. So please get an attorney. And Jim, you work in every state or
No, I work in Ohio. Every state's Medicaid program can be slightly different because states put some of the money in. Medicare is the same across the country. Medicare Advantage plans and supplements are not the same across the country. Hell, they're not necessarily the same across county to county because those are separate insurance policies. Although supplements generally are the same across the whole country, but Advantage plans certainly are not. But Medicare itself, the rehab questions, things like that, yeah, that's the same across the country because that's just federal money.
well, what
But
about like the
Medicaid,
packages, the HIPAA packages and things, those things? Can you do those all over the country?
HIPAA is a federal law, so that's should be useful anywhere in the country. Okay.
So good.
Um, every state, as far as I know, every state has some sort of general power of attorney form. Most of them are garbage. Um, and I mean, they just don't go far enough. They don't cover enough things. When this is part of what's in that magazine article I mentioned. Um, most states have some sort of healthcare power of attorney form. Frankly, I'm a fan of using the state form healthcare power of attorney just because every doctor who's been around for more than a couple of weeks will have seen it. Every nurse will have seen it. Okay. So they don't have to send it up to the law department. They say, oh, I know this form. So I like using in Ohio, I just use the form right off the internet with all the organizations that created the form still on the front page. So it visually looks like what the doctor expects. And then in 10 seconds, they know who's in charge and they know if there's any special instructions and they know if there's a living will to go look for, rather than having to send stuff to the law department to get double checked. Because in healthcare, there are emergencies. In general powers of attorney, there's almost nothing on the business side that can't wait till business hours tomorrow. But healthcare, it may not be able to wait 10 minutes.
Yeah, you got to have it prepared. And the thing is too,
Mhm.
I think I heard one other attorney say the one of the biggest things you can do is sit down with your family and talk about this stuff. Don't
Yeah,
make it a mystery.
no,
Tell them what your intentions are. You know, I know there's different generations that have problems with that kind of stuff. I know my parents did not tell us what they had for themselves until the last freaking second. I mean, my mother was terminally ill, and then they say, "Oh, well, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this." But I think it should be a family discussion all the time,
yeah.
at the risk of being
Let's say your
morbid.
mom was terminally ill and she had a nice insurance policy and never told a life insurance policy, and you don't want to cash it in, but when she passes away, yeah, I mean that's why she bought it. But if she never tells you about it, it's idle.
Yeah,
Insurance
don't
company would be
expect the
glad to
insurance
keep the money.
company. Exactly. Insurance companies, they are not responsible for
No,
letting family members know that such a thing exists. So you
right.
have to, you have to be having those discussions with people that you love, that are going to take care of you, like he said. And also, Jim, the last thing I wanted to ask you was something I just read this morning, and I hadn't realized this, but is it true that if say there's two spouses, and one is predeceded the other one, and there's one that has to go on Medicaid for their long-term care, right? Can the state go back later and take your home still? Is that a possibility? In other words, do your heirs get the home free and clear, or do you have to, you know?
That depends on the state. Okay, the federal government, starting with, oh, when was OBRA? I got another budget bill, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, and I'm blanking on the year, 1994, I think. Okay, OBRA 94 required states to set up what they call Medicaid estate recovery programs. So if someone who is on certain Medicaid programs, and that may vary from state to state, for example, states could decide whether to include Obamacare costs or not in their Medicaid estate recovery programs. But anyone who built up such a Medicaid debt, making air quotes around Medicaid debt, if they died with something, and that they might have $2,000 in the bank because they're allowed to have $2,000 in California now, it's 130, and next year it's going to be unlimited. But I don't think it takes away the obligation to have Medicaid estate recovery. But some states have very aggressive Medicaid estate recovery programs. Other states do not. Ohio has a very aggressive Medicaid estate recovery program. They have recovered in the tens of millions of dollars a couple of years ago, which is
Oh
the
my
last.
gosh, they're taking the ring off the dead person's finger,
I don't know if
probably.
they've gone that far, but the House is the easy one to get because the House depends on paperwork. So it's easy to file a lien on the house. Okay, so it under federal law, you can't take the house away. You can't do Medicaid estate recovery, which means you can't take the house away while the Medicaid recipient or the spouse are alive. Okay, there's no estate recovery until the Medicaid recipient dies. It's estate recovery, so they're dead. Okay, and there's no estate recovery while the spouse is still alive. But once the spouse is gone, yeah, Medicaid can attempt to recover whatever the Medicaid recipient had at the time of death, and that may include the
Wow.
house or half the house or whatever. And Medicaid doesn't care that heirs wanted, and that was the family plan. Now, there was in March of 2020, I think it was, um, a report by MACTAC, the Medicaid and CHIP Program Technical Advisory Committee, which is supposedly nonpartisan and frankly seems to be nonpartisan, reporting to Congress on suggestions and issues inside the CHIP program, which is health insurance for children, and the Medicaid program. And in the report that year, again, I think this was 2020, they had a pretty scathing report, a pretty scathing bad things to say, I guess is the best way to put it, about the Medicaid estate recovery program. But Congress has not picked that up. It's not like Congress hasn't had other stuff to do with COVID going on. I don't know if that will ever come to fruition, and I'm sure it won't come to fruition during a Republican Congress. But maybe that report reopens that question.
Because it's kind of, so. I mean, one thing you could do if your children are of age, you could go ahead and just give them the house ahead of time, right? I mean, if they're old enough, you
You
could go
can,
ahead
but then
and,
they do something stupid like, they guarantee a business loan or they run over some basketball
yeah,
player's kid in the car. If you're going to try to shelter the house, my suggestion is a trust specifically for the house that is tax advantaged because of to try to preserve the tax advantages that go with the primary residence.
perfect. Okay, because
And put
that's,
only the house in there, by the way. Okay, the house and maybe enough money to pay the taxes and things like that.
yeah,
But
that
then
would
you'd
be.
also need to have a rental agreement back to your house, which is okay.
So, oh, you mean so the person, so then the it belongs to the trust, but the trust is renting it as a landlord,
Right.
acting as a
Yeah.
landlord,
Yep.
basically.
It's sort of
Okay.
like the sale leaseback that businesses did a few decades ago, where they wanted to get out of the business of owning property and wanted to pay rent because it had better tax consequence. Well, this has a better tax consequence. Well, it has an equal tax consequence, but it has a better long-term care protection consequence.
Oh, this is great. This is the reason everybody that lawyers are running the government, and they're also, you have to have them to fight the government or to figure out the loopholes. Because I had a attorney friend of mine who was fond of saying that she never met a clause, she couldn't figure out a way around it. She never, there's always a way around everything. It's just that this is why you need someone like Jim to help you plan so that you try to cover every contingency. Because I can't think of all these different scenarios, but there's a lot of them. So, I mean, this is a great subject. It was a great discussion. I wish we had longer time. I'm going to try to talk Jim into one day doing maybe a training, a paid training for these insurance guys, so that they can explain some of these things to people and maybe partner with an attorney so that they can get the full coverage for their clients, because so many things can happen. And I've heard of people losing their homes, and it just doesn't even seem, I mean, you've got horror stories too, I'm sure, Jim, but it's too late when you need this care. It's too late to do anything, to do planning. So
No, it's not.
there's a
No, there's
reprieve.
still things you can do even at the time you need care. You
Really?
won't save everything, but you may save 40%, but it's still better than zero.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's hope. Like I said, wherever there's an attorney, there's a
Yeah.
way
We
around
refer to that as crisis planning.
crisis planning. But you don't want to do that. If you're younger, for example, long-term care standalone, if you're in your 40s, it's a great time to look into it, because you can sometimes lock in rates that you'll never get once you turn
Mhm.
60. So there's a lot of planning. I would encourage everybody on listening to the call to, check out Jim's website for sure. We're going to have that in the show notes. And also talk to your attorney, talk to your family, most of all. Talk to your family about what you want to see happen. Also talk to your insurance or a financial planner about the implications of doing these things, because you put a bunch of good minds together and you can figure out a way that you can keep or pass on most of your wealth. You don't want to lose your legacy just because you didn't plan. And
Tammy, can I tell people how to find an attorney like me?
how do you find it? What's the best way, Jim?
Okay, well, there are two ways. One, if you want to find an attorney who has care coordination, like I do with my nurses, most of them are members of the Life Care Planning Law Firms Association. So go to LCPLFA. Yeah, that's a mouthful. LCPLFA.org. And there's a search function there. If you want someone who just does the elder law stuff and doesn't bring care coordination along, I'm not a fan of that. I'm a big fan of care coordination now that I find care coordinators that make me happy. Um, you can go to NAELA, the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, NAELA.org. There's a search function there. The search function at NAELA definitely works better by zip code, but you can find an attorney who does long-term care stuff. Now, check out their websites, because there are lots of people who do estate planning that don't really get long-term care, but they can still join NAELA because that is elder law to some extent. So check out the website after you find them. Okay, almost everybody at LCPLFA does long-term care because that's why they have care coordinators.
It's perfect. That sounds like a really good way to go, everybody. And if you're in Ohio, of course, you want to call Jim, because he's like,
I'm good with that.
yeah. If you live anywhere in the great state of Ohio, then you need to call Jim to help with all of your elder care needs, not just long-term care, but other stuff. And whatever you do something, because times are perilous. And I know everybody's focus is in a million different directions, but I've seen this firsthand. And trust me, you do not want to be left holding the bag, and you don't want your entire legacy to be decimated because you didn't take the time to do it. Yeah. So I appreciate Jim Koewler for being on. I really wish him the best, because I think he's a super smart dude with this. And I wish that he could work in every state, including California, but we just,
I don't want to take that many bar exams, thank you.
oh my God. And the bar exam here, I've heard, is horrendous anyway by
Yeah,
anybody's. Yeah. So, and we still have too many lawyers, even with that. So that it doesn't really filter anybody out, I guess.
but there
But
aren't enough elder law attorneys, and there certainly aren't enough life care planning attorneys.
there aren't. And I'll tell you, if it's focusing on anything to do with older people, is a really smart move. So everybody, thanks so much for being here. I want to thank Jim Koewler again. Awesome guy. Can people still connect with you on LinkedIn and stuff, and
Sure.
just say hey? And
Yes.
because he's
Yeah,
a
I
wealth
also,
of
my website has a contact me page as well. And my blog is a separate website and it's its own contact me page.
perfect.
They
And
look
the
very
blog,
similar intentionally, but and don't laugh at how old my blog is.
I
I've
know,
not
but it's still got good
updated in
stuff on
years.
it. It's still got good stuff on it because a lot of these things are pretty evergreen,
Yeah.
kind of just common sense things that you want to do, no matter what age you are, no matter what part of the financial life cycle you're in. It just makes good common sense. And I love bringing people like Jim on that are experts in these fields. And thanks so much, Jim. Thanks for
Thank you.
wearing the shirt. I didn't know how the audience was going to react to you being bare chested and showing off your six pack and everything. But so thanks for putting the
I'd have to
shirt.
go get some beers to show off a six pack.
Uh-oh,
I got no
uh-oh.
other way to do it.
Got no other way to do it. Well, anyway, again, if you're in Ohio, you need to look up Jim Koewler and his wonderful merry band of attorneys, and we will definitely have him back on again as these laws get passed. I want to get your how you weigh in on it and dig into the weeds a little bit and tell us how that's going to impact people. Because,
Okay.
all right, thanks so much, Jim. Have a great day. Thanks for finally coming on, and we will talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Tammy.